The story of trust. Rabbi Nachman said, I told one other story about trust, and this is it. Once there was a king who thought to himself, who is there in the world with less worries than I? I have all the good things, and I am a king and a ruler. He went to investigate this. He went out in the night and stood by people's houses to eavesdrop and listen to the words of the world. He listened to the worries of each one. This one had troubles with his shop. Another had a problem for which he needed to see the king, and so with the worries of each one. After this, he went and saw a house that was partially submerged underground, its windows almost touching the ground, and the roof broken and collapsed. He saw a man sitting inside, playing a fiddle, but one had to listen very carefully to hear. He was very happy. He had a jug of wine sitting on the table before him. There were foods placed before him, and he was very happy, filled with joy, and without worries at all. The king entered the house and greeted him, and he answered. He saw the jug of wine and the foods, and how the man was filled with joy. The man invited him to drink, and he drank to the king. The king also drank, out of affection for the man. Then he lay down to sleep, and the king saw that he was totally joyful, without any worry. In the morning the king rose, and the man also rose and escorted him. Then the king asked him, How did you obtain all this? The man answered, I can fix all sorts of things that are broken. I go out in the morning and fix things, and when I have gathered enough money, 5 or 6 gold pieces, I buy all these foods and drinks for myself. When the king heard this, he thought to himself, I will sabotage this. So the king went and made a declaration that anyone who had something needing repair must not give it to any other man to repair. Either he must fix it himself or buy a new one. In the morning the man went looking for things to fix, but they told him about the ruling of the king. It was very difficult for him to accept, yet he trusted in God. He went and saw a nobleman chopping wood and asked him, Is this in accord with your honor? The man answered, I searched for someone to chop it for me, but could not find anyone, so I had to do it myself. He said, Allow me, and I will chop for you. He chopped the wood, and the nobleman gave him a gold piece. He saw that this went well, so he looked for more wood to chop, until he gathered 6 gold pieces, bought his usual meal, and was happy. The king passed his house again, peering through the window. He saw the man sitting there with the drink and the foods before him, appearing very happy. The king entered the house and they had an exchange similar to the first time. The king slept there, as on the first night, and in the morning the king rose, and the man escorted him out. The king asked again, "Where did you get all this? This requires a good deal of money." The man answered, "It was my custom to fix things needing repair." Then the king decreed not to give any item to any man to fix. So I cut wood until I gathered enough money for all this. The king then left and passed a decree not to let any man chop wood. When the man came to someone and asked if he had wood to be chopped, the man told him of the decree of the king. It was upsetting for him, for he had no money. Nevertheless, he trusted in God. He went along and saw a man cleaning a stable. He asked him, "Why would someone such as you be cleaning a stable?" He replied, "I looked for someone to clean it, but could not find anyone, so I had to do it myself." He said to him, "Let me clean it." He cleaned it completely, and the man gave him 2 gold pieces. Then he went and cleaned other stables, gathered 6 gold pieces, bought his customary meal, went home, and was very happy. The king came again to his house to see how he had fared, and he again saw everything as before. He entered the house as before, and in the morning the man again escorted the king, and the king asked him, and he answered, "All as before." So the king went and decreed that no man should be allowed to clean a stable. In the morning the man went looking for stables to clean, and they told him of the king's newest decree. So the man went and enlisted as a soldier with the minister, who recruited soldiers for the king. There are soldiers who are enlisted mandatorily by the government, and there are other soldiers who are hired for a salary. He had himself hired, and he set conditions with the minister that he would not be enlisted permanently, rather on a daily basis. Every day in the morning he would be paid for a day's work. The minister outfitted him immediately in a soldier's uniform, gave him a sword, and sent him to where he was needed. In the evening, after having finished all his work, he stripped off the uniform, bought his usual meal, went home, and was very happy. The king came to see him again, and saw that all was prepared before him, and that he was very happy. He entered and slept, as before. In the morning he asked him as before, and the other answered as before. The king then went and summoned the minister, and commanded him not to draw any money from the treasury to pay any of his men that day. The next morning the man went to the minister to receive his daily pay, and the minister would not pay him. He asked him, "But did we not agree that you would pay me each day?" He answered that the king had decreed not to pay any man that day. All that he argued with him was to no avail. The minister said, I will pay you for 2 days tomorrow, but today it is impossible to pay you. What did he do? He went and broke off a piece of his sword, affixed a piece of wood in its place, so that the difference could not be discerned from a distance. Then he went and pawned the metal blade and bought with it his usual meal. The king came again and saw that his happiness was even more complete than before. He again entered the house, slept there, and asked him as before. He explained that he had been obliged to break off a piece of the sword, and had pawned it and bought with it his meal. When I get paid, I will use the money and repair the sword, and no one will notice. I can fix all sorts of broken things, and there will be no damage to the property of the king. The king then went to his house and called the minister and said, There is someone sentenced to death. Call that man whom you hired as a soldier, and command that he decapitate him. The minister did accordingly. He called him, and he came before the king. And the king had commanded to gather all the noblemen to come and see this farce, that there was a man who had inserted a piece of wood in place of the blade of his sword. The man came before the king and fell on his knees, asking, My lord the king, why was I called? The king answered, To cut off the head of the man sentenced to death. He answered him pleadingly, saying that he had never shed blood in his life, and the king should choose someone else. But the king answered him that specifically he must do it. Then he asked the king if the man's guilt was certain. I have never shed blood in my life. All the more difficult it would be for me to execute someone whose guilt was not certain. The king answered that there was no question that the man was guilty. And now it is specifically you who must execute him. Upon seeing that it would be impossible to sway the king's decision, the man turned to God and said, God Almighty, I have never shed blood in my life. If this man is not guilty, may the metal of my sword turn to wood. He unsheathed his sword, and everyone saw that it was wood. It was an object of great hilarity. The king saw that he was a fine man, and he let him go.